Hello everyone, today we are relaunching the Bitcoin Policy UK podcast. I'm Kaitlyn and I'm studying politics and international relations.
And I'm Harley and I host the BPUK Podcast.
We are joined by the two co-founders of BPUK, Susie Violet Ward, the CEO, and Freddie New, Chief Policy Officer.
We're discussing the work that Bitcoin Policy UK do, their efforts to shape policy, and their education with policymakers and the public.
I guess the first question is, what is the BPUK 2025 manifesto and why did you decide to write it?
So we've been working on it for a while. We were basing it off our goals. We want to advocate for anybody in the UK that wants to hold, sell, buy and mine Bitcoin. And we know that the MPs don't necessarily understand Bitcoin in the same way. I mean, global game theory is on and they're not getting the memo. So we thought, send the manifesto to all 650 MPs. But what was beautiful about it was shortly after the comment from Emma Reynolds, the economic secretary to the Treasury. She made a comment actually, Freddie, you're probably much better at remembering exactly what she said, that she was at the Financial Times digital asset or something. And she said, can you remember?
Well, it was in response to a question as to whether or not the UK would ever have a strategic Bitcoin reserve in response to the efforts of the United States to create such a reserve over there. And her position, replicated in writing to us afterwards, was that the UK's view was that this wasn't for us, and that Bitcoin is too volatile and an unsuitable asset to go into a reserve. Whenever I hear this, I want people immediately to bring up my two favorite examples of reserves. There's a cheese reserve in the United States. There's a cave in Wisconsin that has about 4 million pounds of cheese sitting there. And funnily enough, there's also a wine reserve in the UK, which I think is underneath the Admiralty or underneath the Foreign Office somewhere. So as soon as you concede that you would have cheese and wine, I mean, that sounds like a great evening, actually, cheese, wine, and Bitcoin. As soon as you can see that either of those two assets can potentially be in a reserve, why not have a digital non-state issued money that's globally liquid 24/7? I mean, I think, Susie, to your point, it just goes to highlight how utterly absurd the UK's position is and quite how far behind we are.
So she said it wasn't for us. So at the Financial Times Digital Asset Summit, and Emma Reynolds says that Bitcoin is not for us. And you think, why? How is that possible?
I guess we'll start with the first goal, which is fair and clear Bitcoin regulation. So what might fair and clear Bitcoin regulation look like?
I get very excited about that kind of question.
You would.
Well, I think the important thing to consider here is that Bitcoin is, as Suji's rightly pointing out, it's unlike anything that most MPs would have encountered in their professional lives before. So they're used to a financial system where it's possible to speak to a trusted third party and ask for someone's account to be frozen or someone's records to be disclosed or for someone to be debanked and so on and so forth. For them to fully understand Bitcoin, they need to understand that it's fundamentally a permissionless system where the old rules do not apply any longer. And in the context of regulation, therefore, you need to consider that while you can regulate people or companies or behaviors, you can't regulate the asset itself. Nothing the FCA does is going to affect your ability to broadcast a transaction to the network. And nothing the FCA does will ever stop a valid transaction eventually being mined into a block and included in the transaction record. Those 2 points are things that they fundamentally don't yet understand. They think you can, if I tell someone not to do this, they'll do it. And they don't understand that the system doesn't care what they do or what they think. So that's part of our educational effort to get them over the hump. And, not to be afraid about it. It is just a computer system that has certain properties and a certain way of working that they need to understand in order to, effectively drag themselves into the 21st century. So, for me, fair and clear Bitcoin regulation really starts with understanding the whole, and I hate this term, digital asset space. However, as a Bitcoin maximalist, I also need to understand that, NFTs exist, meme coins exist, stable coins exist. But in terms of helping politicians and lawmakers understand the space, that's helpful in a way. And for us, we sort of see the digital asset space bifurcating or trifurcating into sort of three buckets. One being Bitcoin, which is a non-state issued digital money. Two, stable coins, which are easier, I think, for regulators and politicians to understand because they tend to be pegged to a US Treasury or to a gilt. and access to the real world that's comprehensible to these people. And then thirdly, meme coins, which, I'm quite a fan of, actually. I admire the honesty of a meme coin in that it's pure naked speculation and gambling.
But is that actually made clear to people, though?
No, but that's the point. And you kind of take the words straight out of my mouth there, because at the moment, your point's completely correct. It's not, is it?
No.
And the FCA at the moment tell you that a meme coin is exactly the same as Bitcoin, and exactly the same as a stable coin, because they bucket them all within this definition, which we'll probably refer to a couple of times in the chat. And again, I'm getting ahead of myself here, the restricted mass market investment. So, Susie, you're completely right. The problem at the moment is the FCA look at anything that is connected with a computer and functions on some form of distributed ledger, and they say you're all the same, and that's really not the right message to send to the market. And we can explore why as we discuss later.
Cool. Thank you. Can we use any examples from the US or El Salvador, and look at what they're doing with Bitcoin, and can we use that in the UK, or is that completely irrelevant?
I think starting with El Salvador, because El Salvador is a very small country, so it's a really good use case. But I'm not convinced that they're actually that much of a Bitcoin country, really. I mean, I think on the ground, most people don't use it as much as we're led to believe. So I know they made it legal tender, but then they took that away. And so I'm not sure that that's the best use case. I think that looking at the US and what they want to try and do, because the US implements something, the rest of the world will follow. So it is global game theory in action, which is why it's so frustrating with the UK, because they're not paying attention. When Emma Reynolds said it's not for us, I don't know how you can say that when the US are talking about making it part of a strategic reserve.
Being a bit geeky on the El Salvador point, so if you look at the Bitcoin law, the original provisions designated Bitcoin as legal tender, and legal tender has a very specific legal meaning, which is that it's normally a good settlement for all debts, public and private. And so a public debt is a debt that you might owe the government in respect of the taxes that you owe the government, and private might be a debt that Susie and I owe each other. And so legal tender has a very specific legal meaning. So El Salvador, in order to obtain further funding from the IMF, were forced effectively to amend the Bitcoin law by the IMF, which is pretty egregious interference by an extranational body in a sovereign nation state. But they were forced to amend the Bitcoin law, in particular to remove the designation as legal tender. However, I think El Salvador have actually been quite smart in the way that the drafting works. So it's worth reading I'm sure everyone will immediately rush and do this. It's worth reading the law in detail and understanding what they've done. So Bitcoin can still be accepted by any merchant in El Salvador. So it can be used in trade, and it can be used in largely the same way as it was before the change driven by the IMF. However, it's no longer a good settlement for public debt. So in other words, you can't pay your taxes any longer. But going a bit further than that, I tend to think that legal tender is a bit of a red herring anyway, in that Bitcoin is, as we've said already, is a non-state issued money. And it's going to be adopted, if it is adopted, largely from, I think, both from the ground up by people using it as a means of payment, whether the government permits that or not, and also top down. And top down I see more as a store of value movement, as you say, Susie, the way that it's currently being used effectively as a hedge against sovereign debt default in the United States. Larry Fink obviously talks at length about the extent to which he sees Bitcoin as a hedge against sovereign debt default, and I don't disagree with him at all there. But it's such a fascinating creation that it can serve both of those purposes as a micropayment cross-border technology, and also as a hedge against the rapid devaluation of national currencies.
Answer. And what impact could this have on the Bitcoin industry and the UK, and ultimately for the public?
They're going to have to pay attention, aren't they? I mean, I say that, but will they? I mean, the impact on the UK if the US make it a strategic reserve, is that what you mean?
Yeah, well, what impact could fair and clear Bitcoin regulation?
Well, it means that businesses can operate and they don't have to leave. You were on a Spaces earlier talking to Peter, and he was saying that every single week a company is leaving to go to Dubai?
Well, we can give you some specific examples. So, Bring In, for example, a company with whom we've been in touch frequently, or Pocket, both of those operate very, very freely in the EU, Switzerland, and in some cases, and they had looked at the UK market and decided that for the size of the market, it's not worth the cost of compliance to come and do business here. So, by cost of compliance, I mean how much does it cost that business to become compliant with FCA regulation? Now, FCA regulation is so strict they need to spend a lot of money on lawyers and on regulation and compliance teams simply in order to offer their product here. And the UK comparatively is a relatively small market now. It's on its own. It's not obviously no longer part of the EU. Could have been an advantage in some senses, but we've obviously fumbled that ball. And as a market, if I was running a business looking to explore the UK market, I might look at the EU instead. 300 million people, the US 350 million people. Is it worth me spending huge amounts of money on lawyers in order to target a market of only 50 million people? A lot of companies, and we have evidence to support this, are just saying, you know what, we're just not going to enter the UK market, or we'll offer a limited number of products. And as Susie rightly said, people are leaving. It's not just that people are not investing in the UK, people are leaving the UK.
I know people that are leaving, and they have been for years. It's not a recent thing either. I mean, I've interviewed people where they said that they could see which way the wind was blowing, knew that it was going to be a hostile environment, and left. Which is surprising because they want growth and they want to protect investors that we was a pay for on the FCA, and they're doing neither.
Yeah, scary.
Yeah.
Well, they say they want growth, but a huge disadvantage we have is that very few of them have ever worked in an actual business. And I'm obviously not the first person to say this, but it remains true, no matter how many times it's said. Governments are fundamentally a non-productive enterprise. They can facilitate growth by providing the right soil in which things may grow, but fundamentally they can do more good by getting out of the way. But, I shouldn't let my own personal opinions be true.
Bitcoin could actually help make government smaller as well. That's another bonus about implementing Bitcoin. But I don't think that they can see that would be the outcome.
They want to shrink themselves, right?
But they wouldn't see that was the CG outcome. Like, yeah, but they have to understand it to know that that's a contrariance. Sorry, Freddie, what were you going to say?
No, I was going to agree with you. I actually don't think they see Bitcoin as a threat because they think it's just a joke.
Yeah, very true. But it will make government smaller for that very reason. Eventually.
Yeah. And we move on to the second manifesto goal now for being a global leader in Bitcoin innovation.
Yeah. So Freddie wrote a paper recently that you submitted to the FCA, and you talked about a second mover advantage. Were you being kind?
No.
Do you think they actually have an opportunity to have a second mover advantage?
I think there's something to be said for looking at other jurisdictions. So we obviously do this in the way the regulation is developed and created anyway. There's a principle called same risk, same regulation, which is that when a new technology emerges or when a new market entrant appears, you try and analogize between that new product or that new market entrant and see if there's anything about it that might fit existing regulation. And then so if the risks appear similar, then you can potentially adapt the old regulation to the new one. And actually, in some of our previous work, we've suggested to, not least to the European Union, that if you're desperate to release new shitcoins on the market, then let's look back at the existing prospectus regime, which sets out exactly the process you have to follow if you want to offer security to the public. If a company wants to go public, there are very, very well-trodden paths that it needs to follow in order to do that. You need to have a prospectus or an offering document. You need to tell the public exactly what the company is, what it does, how long it's been around, how its financials work, who the team are, so that the public can make an informed decision as to whether or not they want to invest. And, if you want to have an ICO, which kind of fallen out of favor, but they still do occasionally happen, then follow the prospectus regime. It's very, very well trodden, it's very well tested, and it kind of works. Of course, that would require these companies to admit that their products are not decentralized tokens, but are actually effectively securities. So perhaps that is not something that they would support. But that's the general sort of principle that we would support in that context. And getting back to your question, in innovative regulation, and I think there was an opportunity for us to learn from what other jurisdictions are doing, the second mover, look at VARA, look at the SEC, look at the EU, and then cherry pick the best bits of those different regimes, and also create something new at the same time, which I'm afraid we have so far failed to do in this country.
Do you think we will?
It's an interesting question. I think if the FCA can kind of get over their terror at, and flipping this around and trying to be sympathetic towards them, it's the same old adage: no one was ever fired for buying Microsoft. All of these people that are so incredibly risk averse, and they know that if they do something wrong, if they just open the floodgates to any form of cryptocurrency shenanigans, and then something awful like Luna or FTX or Celsius or BlockFi happens again on their watch, they would immediately get excoriated in the press.
But it's easy to solve. They just have to separate Bitcoin and crypto. So why can't they do that?
That would help, but I think at the same time, you could still envisage a situation where a bad actor like Sam Bankman-Fried runs an FTX exchange that is solely Bitcoin and still embezzles customer funds. So the fact that if FTX had been an only Bitcoin exchange, Sam Bankman-Fried would still have been a bad actor. He would still have stolen customer funds.
So that's not anything to do with the asset. That's to do with the exchange.
Well, that's the problem. But then in the public mind, as soon as that goes wrong, I mean, you know as well as I do, everyone in the vast majority of the public conflate Bitcoin and crypto, and the fact that Bankman-Fried was a bad actor and he was committing a very old school fraud kind of doesn't matter. I mean, I had people after FTX went down come up and say, I had the CEO of Bitcoin is going to jail.
Bitcoin, like crazy term. What I'm hearing is that maybe not going to skip ahead, but the most important thing is education of self-custody in that case. But that can be for later.
No, you're not wrong.
An important question now is then, how is Bitcoin Policy UK going to and has been helping overcome these hurdles that you've just brought up?
Shall I?
Yes, you are the chief policy officer, so
Well, I write a lot of very, very long, very boring consultation responses.
Honestly, they're not. They're very long, but they're not boring.
Thank you, you're very kind.
No, they're really good. Honestly, and we're turning them into audio as well. Like, I really recommend listening or reading them, because actually the last two papers that I've read are actually brilliant.
Oh, thank you.
No, they really are. So they're not boring.
So we try very much to have a fact-based and very grounded approach to all of our policy work. So perhaps giving you two examples. One key thing in terms of education, and we made this point both in in-person meetings in Parliament and in our written work, is that we already differentiate between different types of companies. Our law recognizes that I can spin up a company in my kitchen where I hold the shares and I'm the sole director. I can't offer shares in that company to the public. The prospectus regime we talked about a minute ago, that doesn't apply because I wouldn't even pass the first hurdle of being able to offer those shares to the public. At the same time, you have a company like Meta, which actually has a market cap comparable to Bitcoin at the moment. It's listed, I think it's got a NASDAQ listing on a public exchange. It's a blue chip company that has a very, very different risk profile from my kitchen company that I incorporated last weekend. So the law already differentiates between those two different companies. Our messaging to the FCA, to Parliament, and to other regulators is that if we're able to differentiate between different types of companies, we should be able to apply the same kind of differentiation, the same risk, same regulation that I spoke about earlier, to different types of crypto assets. Bitcoin is clearly a Meta. That's a blue chip crypto asset which has 15 years of uninterrupted operation. It's completely decentralized in terms of its decision making, how new entries are made to the ledger, and how its code is changed. Whereas you may have a new meme coin that most of which is held by the person who created it and whose properties can be changed very quickly. Those have completely different risk profiles, and the law and regulation should accommodate that.
No, I was just going to say, I said your last two papers were excellent. I didn't bring the last two. They have all been excellent. I just remember the last two most clearly. So I just wanted to just throw that in there as to say they're all great, not just the last two.
Thank you. I obviously don't really remember biting any of them, but that the trauma was too extreme. And then the second example I might add is so the crypto asset reporting framework. So this is more of a tax-based paper rather than a regulation one, but it's quite important from a personal safety perspective. So, being brief, the crypto asset reporting framework is largely tax-driven, and that will require exchanges to disclose to their own domestic tax authority, HMRC in our case, buys and sells, transfers, names, home addresses, and there's another piece of regulation called the travel rule, which derives from the Financial Action Task Force. And the travel rule, which you may have seen if you've made any transfers on and off platform recently, requires you to identify whether you control an external address to which you send Bitcoin. And the final piece of the puzzle is data and information leaks, which, as we've seen just 2 weeks ago, there was an HMRC leak. 100,000 people's personal detail was leaked from HMRC. We'd said in the paper, there's an extreme risk that if the data that is transmitted to HMRC in relation to how much you own, how much you buy or sell, where you live, what your name is,
What else do you need?
I mean, Jesus Christ, map that with the travel rules so people are then able to see exactly what addresses you control because you've transferred them off platform, and then HMRC just leaks it all to the public anyway. That is setting people up for violent crime.
It doesn't even work in TradFi. So with the FATF travel rule, that's not a new crypto thing.
I know it's been on for decades.
And it didn't stop illicit activities then. Because I think according to the World Bank, 3 to 5% of global GDP is what they think are classed as illicit activities. And that figure hasn't changed for over 20 years. So the rules that they've implemented in TradFi have proven not to work, yet they now want to bring them into crypto. And I think that's the thing that drives me crazy, is it's a proven thing not to work. So why would you want to do that when you're putting people at risk?
Because it's easy. Governments have traditionally delegated law enforcement to the financial services industry. It's been happening since the Bank Secrecy Act, frankly.
So there's no accountability then?
Fundamentally, no. And to be honest, I think you have to take a bit of a cynical view here and realize that it's changing that type of thinking is so extraordinarily hard. We're unlikely to be successful, certainly in my lifetime. And so therefore you need to take steps to protect yourself, which I think is where we come on to self-custody and peer-to-peer.
But the data's already out there.
But they don't care. Why are they incentivized to change anything?
Because we were having a conversation about this the other day, where the government expects full transparency from us. They do. They expect us to. They track everything that we do, and they have all the information. They want to know everything that we're doing, but they don't seem to feel like they have an obligation to keep us safe. Which that also blows my mind. And I don't know why they can't be held accountable for that.
And Bitcoin lets you keep yourself safe. I mean, you can generate as many addresses as you want.
Does it? When you look at the rules that Freddie's just described.
But at the same time, you can generate a key pretty easily without having to disclose all your addresses without not complying.
But the fact that you've bought it in the first place.
It's safer not to buy on an exchange. Well, actually, there's kind of a different point here. Because we live in a hybrid world, if at some point, for example, you wanted to sell some of your Bitcoin to buy a house, it might be sensible to have a KYC stack and a non-KYC stack. Because if you wanted to liquidate the funds, your solicitor and your conveyancer would then want to know source of funds information. Where did you get this information from? We need to recognize we live in a world where these things are going to be required of us. And if you want to show where your house deposit came from, if you've got a KYC stack on an exchange, that's a perfectly fair use of your money. And it's easy then for you to liquidate and to use that fiat to buy the house. However, if you want to protect yourself and you therefore buy non-KYC and keep it in a self-custodial address, it effectively never touches an exchange and it's never associated with you as an individual. That's also a good way of protecting yourself and your own personal security and safety. And
So you want to interact with the financial system.
Well, exactly. That's right. So if you think there's likely to be a point where you do need to interact with a traditional financial system, perhaps you need to consider siloing your different.
It's very difficult not to, though, isn't it? Just generally.
At the moment, yes, but I think we're moving in a decent direction. Aqua have just launched their Dolphin card, for example, which is an interesting product. Bitrefill, as you know, offer prepaid Visa cards. which are an interesting thing to do. So the Bitcoin company, I think they offer a prepaid Visa. I've experimented with those myself. You can load them in Amazon as a payment option. So there are ways of beginning to bridge the gap at the moment.
Yeah, not easy though, is it?
No, but remember how difficult the internet was.
Yeah,
25 years ago.
Yeah, we are still early.
But I mean, this is just highlighting everything, why we need what you two are doing at the end of the day. And it's why it's so important that you two are fighting and advocating for them to maybe loosen the rules, or at least not make them worse.
Or at least to understand the... So, coming to your education point, I genuinely don't think a lot of them will have understood the risks to personal safety and security in terms of CARF plus travel rule plus disclosure of holdings and names and addresses. So, as part of that evidence, we submitted a very long list that's compiled and maintained by Jameson Lopp of Bitcoiners who've had experienced physical attacks. And even in the time between when we sent that in and when we published it, it became out of date. There were 2 further attacks in Frost. Exactly.
Yeah, that's telling.
Yeah, it's very scary. And I genuinely, like to your point, I genuinely don't think they realise that this is a risk. And we illustrated that, but it's a huge risk, partly because of the nature of the asset, which is that it's uncensorable. And once you broadcast that transaction and then flip it into Monero or something, it's extraordinarily difficult to claw back that Bitcoin. It's not like me sending from Barclays Bank to Chase Bank and then Chase freezing that money. That option doesn't apply.
Yeah. Do you want to move on to number 3?
Yeah, so goal number 3 is educate policymakers and the public, which is my favourite goal. I don't know, I mean, they're all interesting, but this one's my
I
favourite.
love that you got a favourite.
Oh my gosh, well, I was reading his one.
Right there.
Is it your favourite?
No, the next one's my favourite. I bagged in number 4.
Yeah, so how do you plan on approaching policymakers and the public to educate them about Bitcoin? So I feel like you guys have already answered that question. You're well.
PPG and when you go to the House of Lords, I think that's probably the most relevant. So you had a brilliant interaction the other day, didn't you?
Yeah, so we had a really good meeting. It was convened by Lord Vasey in the House of Lords. He's looking perhaps to recreate the old APPG. So if anyone isn't aware, the APPG stands for All Party Parliamentary Group, and they are collectives of MPs and Lords from all different parties who have an interest in a particular subject. There are all kinds of APPGs for all kinds of subjects. And Lord Vasey, it seems, is trying to put together another one on Bitcoin, crypto, and digital assets. And he was really thoughtful, and it was, I think, probably the most positive meeting I've had in Parliament on the subject. And we put to him the idea of a differentiation in type between digital assets, as we've just described, ranging from your Meta to your kitchen company. And he got that immediately. And he said, yes, this is great, let's explore that, which is a hugely positive sign. And then we sent him some paperwork afterwards. So I think in terms of sort of educating, maybe you can talk a bit more, Susie, about what we try and do outside of Parliament, maybe the stuff that Huxley does as well. But
Yeah.
In terms of our parliamentary education, a lot of it's personal meetings and paperwork. But the other education stuff is equally important, I think.
So Freddie works on the top down and there's the grassroots. And so education, because one of the biggest bugbears that I have is the perception that people have in the public about Bitcoin because of everything that they've read in the mainstream media, which we know isn't correct. It's provably not correct. And they've been pumping out this misinformation for, well, the whole of Bitcoin's life, essentially. So people think that it's used for criminals, that it boils the oceans, and that it's a Ponzi scheme. So when it comes to educating MPs, that's the preconceived idea that they have. I mean, we had a meeting, didn't we, recently? I'm not sure if I can say their name. And then at the end of the meeting, they were quite amazed at what Bitcoin could do, but they were all the preconceived ideas that they had. They're typical, and they all think like this. So undoing that is vital. And so grassroots education, and especially through schools. So Huxley has has some miners and he teaches children how mining works, takes them apart, rebuilds them, has little Bitcoin projects that they do. And then Matt has after school clubs that he conducts where he's teaching kids about money, because that's a fundamental thing that they don't really, nobody understands even what money is.
No.
And so I write as much as I can to try and put well-researched, factually correct mainstream media articles out there. It's hard to undo that damage because it's so hardwired into people. But through these education programs, through outreach, through schools, through writing, through our website, the blogs, we do research, and we've got papers like Freddie's papers if anyone wants to listen and read them. You know, that it's piecemeal, isn't it? You just got to keep chipping away at it. It's not going to be easy.
It takes time.
Yeah.
A lot of time.
And effort. It's Brandolini's law, isn't it? It's the asymmetry of bullshit. It's 10 times the magnitude, I think. So you have to try 10 times harder than you have to put in 10 times the energy to undo the original kind.
Because of anchoring bias, people tend to remember the first thing they hear about a subject, and that's their point of reference, and that's why you have to go through the Brandolini process to it. So, I mean, we need to remember most people don't care about Bitcoin, and so they may have read an article in 2015 that said it's born in the oceans, and so therefore for the rest of their life that's going to be what they think about it, because they won't have read anything else about it.
Yeah. It's hard to imagine people that don't care about Bitcoins.
Most everyone in my own wife doesn't care about Bitcoin. My children care about it more than my wife does.
They've got their own little bolt cards, haven't they?
Yes, cool. Yeah. I'm trying really hard. My family are just not.
Are you there as well?
So, yeah. I'm really trying with my dad and my sister. They both hold it. They don't know, but they do both have some that I hold custody on their behalf, and it is theirs.
That's a really good. Have you custody for them? I should know. Don't tell me. Don't. Bad upset.
Terrible upstairs. My sister gave me 20 quid and said invest it for me. I said okay. Then didn't tell her what to do.
On my brother's stag, we wanted to put a QR code henna tattoo on his butt and then get as many people as we could to...
Why do you?
Oh.
That's the moose.
Didn't just answer it. As a wedding present, that would be really funny.
That's the most unique way or kidding. I never had that orange full story before.
But I suppose your family's the complete opposite.
Yeah, but again, that took time. My dad was the first, and it was like we all tried to dismiss it. Failed.
Sweat you champ your dad.
Oh, I'm very. But yeah, like I just remember like every single dinner table chat, it would somehow like lead to Bitcoin, and we'd be like, no, not again. Or like I would come home from school one day and then I'd tell him, oh yeah, I studied this at school, and it could have been something like so irrelevant. It could have been like a maths equation or something like that, and he'll be like, Bitcoin fixes this.
Were you any elliptic curve cryptography? No. We're called public education system.
There we go. He would always try and he's good at that. He's good at what he does.
Because Kaitlyn stayed at Sailor's house. She's like one of the few people that's actually
definitely sort of known to them.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. That was Bitcoin Miami 22. Yeah. 22.
You were 22. I was a 22. I was working on the floor though as a grunt. Our company had a stand there, so I was, didn't see you there, but sounds like you had a better time than I.
Yeah, no, I was working with Safety, and like me and Lauren were working with Safety. That's so cool. Selling books. That's cool. Yeah, he's a nice guy. So I guess the second question would be, what should come first? Should priority be given to educating policymakers, or should it be educating the public on Bitcoin?
Both.
Yeah, and it's very hard to prioritize those because, and I think if you think about it for any length of time, you see they both feed into each other. Because using politicians as an example, they're supposed to represent us, And I think at the moment, they don't realize quite how many Bitcoiners there are. The latest FCA data shows that 12% of the adult population hold cryptocurrency. Most of that's Bitcoin. That's about 7 million people. And really, for a politician to support Bitcoin, there's kind of no downside. Most people don't care. And the people who do care very intensely about it. Well, exactly. So there's a built-in voter base for them there if they want to take it. And I think that's kind of what Farage has identified. And that's why he has released his Bitcoin bill that he announced in Miami in Vegas at the conference this year. But then part of that effort is to tell politicians that this voter base exists. And so one of our projects later this year is going to be releasing a series of very simple template letters on our website that people can very easily find out who their MP is, create an email template, bang it out to them, and try and use some of our grassroots power that we have in this country to make this an electoral issue for MPs and let them understand how important it is to so many people in their constituencies.
That's a really good idea. That's a really, really good idea. And then, do you want to move on to?
Yeah. I was going to say a bit similar to the Save Our Wallets thing that Matt Crello's doing. Sounds like just template, cool, easy. Yeah,
we did the same sort of thing for the CBDC. So Big Brother Watch did a very, very good one. Yeah, template letter there. We publicized that extensively during the CBDC consultation process.
Very nice. Yeah, and that links in with tax reforms and individuals' rights, which is the fourth policy goal. Final one, my favorite one. So I wanted to talk about why self-custody and privacy are so important, especially privacy, because I think so many people inherently feel like they want privacy, but can't articulate why. And I think...
I don't think they understand that privacy is normal as well. I think the mantra that I hear too often is, I've got nothing to hide.
Yes, everyone says that.
Yeah.
Everybody.
And I just don't understand it.
No.
So I think they haven't really thought it through, really. But Bitcoin isn't really private. Really.
Wow. Anonymous.
Anonymous.
Yeah, can be. But people...
But you're interacting with an exchange.
But then it has a mining.
If you don't...
There are non-KYC.
Yeah, you're right. There are obviously non...
I mean, it is the big goal of Bitcoin. One of them is to be private. And I think it's partially succeeded, not perfectly.
Yes.
But just in general, I think it's important because it is so easy. People get hit with that, but you have nothing to hide. And then they have no retort to that. So do you have one?
I'd return always to thinking in the cypherpunk manifesto. So that stated, I think this is quite a powerful and fundamental point. Privacy is the ability to reveal oneself selectively to the world. So if you take a step back and think, who owns your private information? It should be you. That's your information that you don't want the world to know is as much yours as is the Bitcoin in your UTXO or the money in your bank account.
And it's not in your bank.
But it's not money either. So, but your information should be yours, and I think it's as a fundamental point, you should decide what happens to that information. If you want the whole world to know your private information, fine. But the crucial point to note is that at the moment, we don't necessarily have that choice. That's been taken away from us by the relentless information gathering that you were talking about earlier. And that's largely been taken away from us without our consent. And I think the more people understand that, the angrier they will be at the fact they've had to relinquish all this private information to no apparent benefit to themselves. If, on the other hand, you want to gain certain advantages by releasing your private information, then I think that should be your choice. You should decide whether or not you want to do that. And if you want to swap your private information for some personal gain, totally fine. That should be your decision. At the moment, that the choice, the ability to selectively reveal ourselves has been taken away. At the moment, there's a wholesale compulsion to reveal yourself without any choice on your part. I think that's the fundamental issue for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And did you want to retort to the "you got nothing to hide" argument as well?
Yeah, I mean, why do you have curtains on your house and your windows?
It's because the neighbours complain when they see my backside.
But that's your choice.
Well, actually, that's a flippant point. But, perhaps not everyone wants to know your private information.
Well, it's only... Yeah. But you just have these. We wear clothes. There are lots of things that we do because
I wouldn't if I had the choice. Actually, if my body fat percentage was a bit lower, then
Yeah, I think I watched. I can't remember who by, but there's a really good TED talk on privacy, and the point he came up with was it's a precondition for freedom. And if you live in a society where there's a monopoly of violence, you have no freedom if you have privacy.
Right.
And that's it. Because if you do something you don't agree with, and they have the monopoly of violence, you're done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very true. Yeah.
Yeah. And then next question: how significant could tax reforms be for Bitcoin adoption in the UK? We slightly touched on it, but do you want to touch on that, Susie?
I think people wouldn't leave. I think you make this point all the time that if tax was reasonable, people would pay it.
yeah, maybe highlight two specific examples. One of capital gains tax, and one of a sort of de minimis principle. So obviously, capital gains tax is charged if there is a delta between the price at which you bought an asset and which you sold it. Conceptually, I don't think Bitcoin should be subject to capital gains tax at all because it's a money and foreign currency is not in this country subject to capital gains tax at all. I would like to see Bitcoin's tax treatment aligned with that of other money, but that requires obviously the state to acknowledge that this is a non-state issued money, which is a bit of a long stretch for them. So parking that for the moment, there are other tax regimes where the laws take a more enlightened approach to tax. Germany, for example, until recently had a zero CGT regime after a holding period. The Czech Republic has just passed a new law whereby if you hold Bitcoin for 3 years, don't move it, then it's CGT free thereafter. So that's quite an enlightened approach. And then we get into ideas around velocity of money. So most economists will hold that a greater velocity of money in the economy is generally good for commerce and good for businesses. By velocity of money, I mean the ability with which you are able to use your money in the economy to pay for stuff, basically. And at the moment, a lot of Bitcoiners don't use their Bitcoin to pay for stuff because every single transaction is exactly. It's very, every single one is CGT. And I think we're in a position where a lot of people don't do it, like you said, so the HMRC doesn't see that revenue anyway, or they think it's unreasonable, so they don't pay it. So in either case, HMRC's position at the moment means that they're not getting any tax revenue anyway.
When you think about it psychologically, you'd have to give away some of your Bitcoin to be able to pay the tax, and no one's going to want to do that.
Yeah, so they decrease the velocity of money in the economy, and they don't get any. So in other words, they have a negative effect on growth, and they don't get any tax revenue either. So they have a stupid policy in place, which means that they restrict growth and they don't get any money.
So you liked Farage's policy a little bit.
The 10% is a step in the right direction. I'd like to see it drop to zero, or have a holding period. If you holding period is quite a sensible approach, and I'd like to see us move further down Germany and Czech Republic. Maybe the last thing to say there is the original Lummis and Gillibrand bill in the United States in the previous Congress had a kind of halfway house, which was to say that if you're using Bitcoin for payments, there's a de minimis level of $200 per transaction, I think it was, and below that, no CGT would be applicable. So in other words, you'd be able to go pay for lunch or pay for bits and pieces using your Bitcoin, and you wouldn't need to worry about tracking every single transaction for tax purposes.
We're also going to start working on a tax group as well, to try and thrash out some of these issues and lobby accordingly.
I mean, it all just sounds like a little bit ridiculous at some point, just arbitrarily taking numbers to tax/not tax, but
I mean, there's another tax point, but I know I'm conscious we're short of time, and I don't know how boring you want me to be about tax, but it's actually, sorry, while I'm on it, let me be very quickly more. So another piece of what we're doing with HMRC was to try and align the what's called the repo treatment between shares, which are used as collateral, and Bitcoin, which is used as collateral. At the moment, if you lend your shares, that's not treated as a disposal of the shares. It's treated as a no gain, no loss transaction, and it means that you can then get fiat for the loan of those shares. At the moment, if you lend your Bitcoin to an institution to get some fiat, that's actually treated as a taxable event. There was legislation in the pipeline which was supposed to align that tax treatment, and HMRC, in fairness to them, were quite open to discussing that. Unfortunately, that got parked at the end of the last parliament and hasn't been re-upped. we've tried to put some pressure on via an open letter with some of our members to get that back up in front of HMRC. Because again, although the ostensible day one effect is that HMRC won't get a CGT for that Bitcoin sale, they weren't getting it anyway. And it will also increase growth and increase business investment and so on as new products in that sphere are developed. That wasn't too long.
No, not at all. Are we short on time? Should we? I said 5 minutes or so. 5 minutes. Yeah, I think we can squeeze in the last one. So I'll combine the last two questions and pretty much just see if there's any mistakes that you two would pick out of El Salvador's and the US's strategy with Bitcoin that maybe the UK could avoid, again, kind of on their second mover advantage, and then overtake, potentially catch up with those two countries.
We're never going to catch up. I can't think of any mistakes that they've necessarily made. I think it's too early to tell.
I could be ruder about them if you...
No, go for it, yeah.
Operation Choke Point 2.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I was talking about the new administration. I mean, the old administration. Yeah, no, they were horrific.
I was worried the new administration was going to be full on crypto shitcoinery, but then when I read,
They did try with it.
well, when I read the executive order about the strategic reserve, I was frankly astonished. I wasn't expecting to be something of that quality in relation to digital assets coming out of the United States. And for me, the starkest point there was the differentiation between Bitcoin in the reserve and all other confiscated assets on a stockpile. So the reserve has long-term accretive value, and the stockpile is something that is gradually to be used up, like a stockpile of food. And it was astonishing to read that differentiation. So, in answer to your question, is there anything I think avoid everything the Biden administration did.
Yes.
And also your shitcoin.
Yeah, well, exactly. And then cherry pick the best things about the Trump. Not everything the Trump administration has done has been perfect. I mean, I have a very low opinion of meme coins, but if you want to gamble on them, and that's how you want to use them, well, fair enough.
I forgot about that. Actually, you're right. Don't launch your own brick. Though, yeah.
Doing a Farage coin. Oh, he almost said he will. Is that why sack for that? 100%. Good investment. Yeah. That's the last questions I had. Do you want to finish up?
Yeah, so I guess how can people get in touch and or support Bitcoin Policy UK?
So we do need support because we are a team of 14 volunteers. We don't get paid because the companies that would have supported us have been driven out largely. Okay. And so we're up against some really big crypto lobby groups as well that are really well funded by the altcoins that maybe you want to separate out from Bitcoin in terms of treatments. Yes, thank you.
Use your words very carefully, though.
Yeah, so check us out on Bitcoin Policy UK. We've got a donations page, and send us an email at the contact box, and just try and get involved. Yeah, and when Freddie mentioned the template letters, keep an eye out for those. Lobby your MP and make sure that they know that their boat is on the line.
Yeah, that's good. That's end on. Yeah, awesome. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for having us. Yeah, really nice to chat. Thank you.